So let me introduce you to Team UK. Big round for Team UK. They're a country in political and economic decline. Say basically winning the poll is a great boost to national esteem. So who are you going to choose to lead the team? A seasoned polar explorer or a man seeking... Oh, hang on, before we go forward, I need a judge. Who's down the front would like to be a judge? Would you like to be a judge? It's a really hard job. All you have to do is randomly allocate points to whoever you want. The points can vary between 1 and 1 million. You choose on top of the answer, and the end will add up and see who won. And again, your fame will be renowned throughout the cruise. Thank you very much. We'll let our version of Simon Cobell get seated. Okay, so Team UK, who are we going to choose to lead the team? A seasoned polar explorer or a man seeking personal gain? So the judge can hear. A seasoned polar explorer. Good idea. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. You went with Robert Falcon Scott. Born in 1868, he was a captain in the UK Navy. He sought to get into Antarctica as a way of getting promotion. Very class-driven, very hierarchical and class-driven. He showed up in Antarctica with 65 people. Massive expedition, including 12 scientists. Can you get a lot of science done? So we have Robert Falcon Scott. Team Norway. You're a small nation, but with big ambitions. Newly independent from Sweden. You also see gaining the South Pole as a great feat of national esteem. So who are you going to choose to lead you? A seasoned polar explorer, or B, a man seeking personal gain? Use your microphone, Captain.
A seasoned polar explorer.
Good thinking. Did they? Yes, they did. Roald Amundsen. Let me introduce you to the very dour-looking Roald Amundsen. He was born in 1872. He'd been a merchant mariner. He had already been to Antarctica in 1897 to 99, and he was one of the first people across the Northwest Passage, taking 3 years to work his way across the Arctic. And he was driven to achieve polar fame. He landed with 9 people. All had qualifications and skiing experience, and only 2 of them had no polar experience. And 5 went to the pole, including probably the most expert skier from Norway at the time, the champion skier, leading a team of dogs. Okay, Team UK, let's have a look at your ship. The Terra Nova. It's 172 feet long, 52 metres, launched in 1901. It leaks and it's extremely cold inside. Built in the United Kingdom, it was the last steam-powered wooden-masted ship to be built. Team Norway, you're travelling on the Fram, which means forward. Specially designed with a roundish bottom, terrible on the oceans, but when the ice presses in, it lifts up above the ice, so you won't suffer what Shackleton suffered, being crushed in the ice. Commissioned by polar explorer Fridtjof Nansen and given to Amundsen to use. 3 masts plus a diesel engine. Now, Amundsen had actually been planning to go to the North Pole. All his expedition, all his funding, everything was planned for the North. But in 1908 and 1909 respectively, Robert Peary and Frederick Cook both announced they reached the North Pole. Both announced they didn't see the other one there while they were there. Both were backed by different major newspapers. It's since been concluded both probably didn't get there. When they got back, things got very ugly. Big publicity war between the two, big stinging match in the press. So with that in hand, Amundsen, almost at the last minute, said, well, if the North Pole's taken, we're going to go to the South Pole. And he told nobody. He didn't tell the crew, he told his brother, he told the owner, he told one other person. Only 3 people knew he was going to the South Pole. As not until they're on the journey, they said to everyone, guess what? We're not going to the North Pole, we're going to the South Pole. If you want to quit, now's the time. While we're out at sea, with no land around. They stuck with him, they decided to go south. Scott had well publicised his intention to go south, thought Amundsen was going north. Then he got a telegram when he arrived in New Zealand saying, beg leave to inform you, Fram proceeding to Antarctica. And Scott was beside himself. Suddenly he was in a race against one of the most seasoned polar explorers known. So this is where the two men set their bases up. Here come their ships, coming in similar time. We've got Scott landing on the Ross Island, which we talked about before. Ross Island over here. The Norwegians went right around and they camped on the Ross Ice Shelf. So a bit risky, but Amundsen had planned everything right down. So, question for Team UK. Whose base was closer to the pole? Was it the British? Was it the Norwegians? Or were they about the same? Norwegians. Yes, indeed it was. The Norwegian base was 60 miles or 96 kilometres closer to the pole. And you can see there on the map the distance, how much closer it would have been. So here we have a picture of the two huts, the Cape Evans hut that Scott inhabited, and Framheim. Heim being home for the Fram, that the Norwegians had. The British were very divided by rank. The officers lived and ate separately from the enlisted men. Scott made all the decisions. In the Norwegian camp, they all shared the tasks and discussed plans jointly. Even though Amundsen really wanted things his way, he was still having more of a democratic approach. So two very different management styles were running there. Question for Team Norway. What was the main form of transport that the Norwegians used? Was it Siberian ponies, Greenland dogs, or motorised sleds?
The dogs.
The dogs. Let's see. Yes, indeed, Greenland husky dogs. Amundsen had learned how to run them in Greenland from the Inuit. And from northern Greenland, he got the dogs who were very used to the cold. Only the best dogs were chosen and the weakest were trimmed out. And they towed in a fan, all from one central point, not in traces like you do in Alaska. Team UK, what form of transport did Scott use? Motorised sleds, Mongolian ponies, Siberian huskies, or man-hauling? Man, in your microphone, so everybody can hear.
Man-hauling.
Sort of right. He actually used all four. They had dogs, they had horses, they had two motorised transports, and they had a man-haul. But because they moved at different speeds, they had to have their departures all staggered, which is quite a logistic problem. Then the dogs didn't do well. They didn't have someone who only one experienced dog handler. Didn't work well. The horses, well, the ponies left most of them at base camp. Some died of cold and poor food. Lost the horses. The motorised transport broke down very soon, and they were left man-hauling. But we know man-hauling is notable, correct? Team UK? Listen to that music. Oh. Not playing the music. Pretend there's really no more music playing there. Techies, can we get audio for this? Because I need a couple of bits of audio on them. So here we have a really interesting story here. So after landing, the second one of the commanders, Lieutenant Victor Campbell, he took their ship, the British ship, across and bumped into the Norwegians in the Bay of Whales. They're like, the Norwegians here, Norwegians here. So they very, eyed each other off. What are you doing here? What are you doing here? And they invited him to come and have a meal so they could try and get some information from him. They really wanted to know what the British were doing, how long they'd been there, what had they done. Amundsen was really, really worried about those motor sledges. He thought that could be a competitive advantage. What did Campbell supposedly say about the progress of the British motor sledges for Team Norway? That they actually lost one through the ice, which they had. They dropped one, went right through. One had reached solid ground, or that all of them were performing well.
All were performing well.
That's not what they told them, unfortunately. He told them that one had reached solid ground, which in a way was true, because when it went through the ice, it sort of reached the bottom of the ground. So technically, it had reached solid ground. Team United Kingdom, how many thermometers did Scott carry with them? Vital bit of equipment, 3, 2, 1, and it broke soon after setting out.
One, and it broke soon after setting up.
Yes, indeed. 100,000 points. So they were enormously well. One, and it broke soon after, so they were unaware of the rapid plunges of temperatures as they were coming back. Team Norway, question for you. How many of Amundsen's 5 men were navigators? None, 1 or 4?
Four.
Yes, indeed. 4 of the 5 were qualified navigators. Through time they stopped to take readings, each and other could compare each other's readings and compare it. But we've got someone with a lot of knowledge up on stage. That's not how the game's meant to work. We'll get there. Amundsen used prepared navigation charts. Simple calculations could be done when they were tired and cold. 4 of his 5 team were qualified navigators, and he used a sextant during the journey, which is a relatively light and simple piece of equipment. Team UK. How far did Scott's motorised sleds manage to travel? 15 miles, 50 miles, or 150 miles?
A, 15 miles.
Sorry, they travelled 50 miles than anticipated. But yes, they broke down. And the problem was they had 2 engines in them, one at the front and one at the back, and they would overheat crazily. And they couldn't lift the way it was built, they couldn't lift the covering to cool it down properly. And so it seized up before too long. Now, had they had a mechanic, of course, here's a shot of the actual sled in motion. And so it was capable of pulling huge amounts of weight, which was a really big thing for it. So one of the problems is they had no engineer who could fix it. And the problem was, Lieutenant Commander Reginald Skelton was a qualified engineer, but Scott decided to leave him behind because Lieutenant Teddy Evans, second in command, got a bit shirty that he had someone of higher command or equal to him. And he was very class-driven again himself. He insisted he be second in command and that no one could threaten him, so they left their engineer behind. In fact, Scott had thousands of pounds of vital equipment that no one knew how to operate properly as a result. Team Norway, what type of clothing did Amundsen bring with him? Was it Norwegian winter clothing, wool and rubberised fabrics, or Inuit furs?
Inuit furs?
Yes, indeed. In fact, Amundsen said, "I'll call any expedition without fur clothing inadequately equipped." And you'll see there the picture of Amundsen. He's got quite loose, bulky clothing, and so it's designed to let warm air move inside, and sweat will dry very quickly on your body. So it's very easy to move in. Looks bulky, but very easy to do. You're taking a photograph. You're taking a selfie. You have to take something off your head when you take a selfie. Team UK, what type of clothing did Scott bring? Norwegian winter clothing, Inuit fur clothing, or wool and rubberised fabrics?
The sea, rubberized fabric.
Yes, indeed. They took wool and rubberised fabrics. Scott's men had woolen underwear with windproof outer layers. The layer system was good and is still used today, but the problem with allowing for sufficient ventilation during exertion meant that sweat froze in the clothing, making them hard and stiff afterwards. Now, I don't think we've got our audio happening yet, which is a pity. I've got a great little clip from Horrible Histories showing them making their packing list for the pole. You know, do we have rough clothing that's suitable to wear? Check. Leather boots that didn't crack in the cold? Check. We'll jump ahead. United Kingdom. What could the ponies eat in Antarctica? A, other ponies. B, seals and penguins. B, seals and penguins. C, hay and grass.
A, other ponies.
A, other ponies. You would have gone seals and penguins. The ponies. Of course, they only eat hay and grass. But for those in the know who've been following some of the natural talks, how much hay and grass grows naturally in Antarctica? Yeah, not a lot. So they had to bring all the feed needed for the horses. You know, again, large, you could eat the beast when they died, a lot of meat, but had to bring all the food. 10 Norway. What could dogs eat in Antarctica? Other dogs? Seals and penguins? Hay and grass?
B, seals and penguins.
A and B. As they went, the weaker dogs were fed to the stronger dogs to keep them going. So, it's the harsh land, but Amundsen planned everything down to that detail. Nothing was wasted. 10 United Kingdom. How did Scott mark his food depots? Did he put a flag? Did he put a dead penguin? Did he put black rocks placed a kilometre around the depot? What's your decision?
They say a dead penguin, I say a flag.
You're the captain, we'll go with the flag. Yes, indeed, a flag. But he put a single, hard-to-see flag, marking out his spots to make it fine. What the Norwegians did, they put a central flag, and then a kilometre apart, they put another one indicating which way the central one was, and another one indicating there. So if you missed by a bit, it'd still be pointed in the direction you were. Team Norway. Amundsen set off with 52 Greenland Huskies. How many did he return to camp with? All of them? 11 of them? None of them?
Go for 11.
11, indeed he did. As they travelled, the weaker Huskies would be killed and fed to the other Huskies, and as they needed less weight to pull, also they were diminished, so the strongest dogs survived. In fact, they pulled 400 kilogram sledge with food and equipment. As they travelled, said the weakest dogs were killed, and also the bitches, as they came to heat, Amundsen had them shot for loose living and distracting the male dogs too much. The female dogs were shot when they came on heat because they were distracting the males far too much. It's a tough life down in Antarctica in those days. And we talked about Amundsen being worried about those motor sledges. Now it actually made him make a bad decision. It's often said Amundsen was perfect plan, perfect thing. Not exactly. He was so worried about those motor sledges, he set off very early. So he set off on September, far too early in the season. They got a little way ahead and the weather turned against them. They had to turn and make a run for it back to Framheim and kind of stretched out, chaotic return. And when he got there, one of his men was really critical of Amundsen for doing this. And Amundsen proved he had a nasty streak as well, so he really cut off that guy who had criticised him for it. Even though it was correct, he had gone far too early in the season. There we go, there's that back again. So let's have a quick look at Team Norway. You can see how unhappy Amundsen felt about it all. So they set off again on the 19th of October 1911, and their second start. 5 men, 4 sledges, and 50 dogs, so 2 men on 1 sledge. There they go. They crossed the barrier, that great ice barrier, then ran into the mountain range, that huge mountain range that holds back that massive plateau of ice. Okay. And they had to find a way up. They found this one, the Axel Heiberg Glacier, named after one of their sponsors. It was a very, very difficult crossing for them, much harder than Scott had on the Bearsmore Glacier. Here's one of Amundsen's maps. They found a steep and difficult but direct route up a glacier. 7 of the dogs had died on the ice barrier to reach the glacier, and all but the remaining 18 were killed at the top of the glacier. The carcasses were eaten easily by the other dogs and men alike. And they called that the Butcher's Kitchen, which is marked on the map there. The Transantarctic Mountains, as you see marked on the map here, hold back this huge plateau of ice that comes down in glaciers all the way along the mountains here onto the ice shelf. There's a little bit of a film clip I've got here from the earlier film of Scott of the Antarctic, explaining how they're going to travel in 3 stages. See if we get the sound working. No sound, sorry techies. Apologies, sound's still not working. No. So I'll talk you through it. He's describing how they're going to cross the ice barrier, how they're going to go up the mountains, then across the plateau towards the pole. No. Okay. Sure, it's on. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's on. Hold on. Just talk amongst yourselves. Let's try again. No, sorry, audio doesn't want to play, we'll just keep moving on. So, to the United Kingdom. You can see where you set out there from your base on Ross Island. And you head towards the pole. In the United Kingdom, at the last moment, Scott chose to travel to the pole with 5 people. How many people did he have food for? 5, 4, or 6?
4.
Indeed. So Scott had an issue. He travelled with 8 people. As he went on major stations, he'd leave some people behind. And the big question for Scott was, who were the people he would take to the pole with him? It's been criticised he left some of the most competent people behind, like Tom Crean, and others he didn't choose, probably because they weren't officers. And he chose a small group of people who were largely the officers of the group, and then he threw an extra person in. And that extra person didn't even have a set of skis, because they were told to leave their skis further back. So he suddenly had 5 people with provisions for 4, made for a hard trip to the pole. And let's see if this is going to work. Fingers crossed. No, still no audio, sorry. So here's a question from the old telly movie of the 1980s, and you have a look at the faces that men left behind, because they all wanted to come to the pole. Scott had kept that decision up to the last minute, telling who was coming. And it should have been 4 going back, but 3 went back and 5 went on. So Scott's way of travelling was to push on as far as you could in good weather, hunker down in bad weather. The Norwegians travelled every day, but not so far, and they rested long periods every day. So 2 very different techniques of travelling. So finally, the pole. Here's the Norwegians reaching the pole. There were 5 in the team, remember, 1 man's holding the camera. Question to Team Norway. How long did the Norwegians beat the English to the pole by? 1 week? 3 weeks? 5 weeks?
We're good for 1.
1 week. Sorry, it was 5 weeks. A significant difference. 35 days. The Norwegians arrived on the 14th of December. The British arrived 17th of January the following year. So let me talk you a bit through who the Norwegians actually were on this expedition and the ages, you see different. So Helmer Hansen on the far left, he was 41 years old. He was an ice pilot, a skill he had learned while hunting around Spitsbergen. He took part in Amundsen's successful search for the Northwest Passage as second mate. He learned from Inuit how to drive sled dogs. In 1910, he headed south with Amundsen as his expert dog driver. His found a hustle, was 35, born in Oslo. As soon as he was old enough, he went to sea, earned his mate's certificate, later worked as a constable of the Marine Military Corps. Then he was hired as an assistant and as customs authorities, then he sailed on the front. He was also an expert dog driver. Next was Oscar Wisting. It's a later photograph of him. He was 40 years old at the time. He was the eldest of 13 children. His father ran a trucking business. At the age of 16, he went to sea and joined the Royal Norwegian Navy. He was working as a naval gunner when Roald Amundsen asked him to go north with him on his expedition to the North Pole. From 1918 to 25, he was chief officer on board the Maud when Roald Amundsen attempted to traverse the Northwest Passage. And finally, there was Olav Olafsson Bjaaland, 38, born in Telemark, right up the top of Norway. At the turn of the century, he was considered one of the best Nordic skiers in Norway. In 1902, he won a Nordic combined ski competition, and he met Roald Amundsen completely by chance. With a skilled carpenter, they adapted their skis and sledged on the trip as well. And he would often be a forerunner. He would go out in front of the dogs, he would ski right out the front, and the dogs, having something to follow, would be very focused on following him. So here we have the 2 dates. Scott, 17th of January 1912, Amundsen, 14th of December the previous year, 1911. The first inkling they had that the Norwegians had beaten them was to find their marker flags before finding their tent. Black flag on the pole and dog droppings. They knew they were beaten. They pressed on to finally find the Norwegian tent marking the pole. And it's fingers crossed, the sea as depicted in the 1985 telemovie. Still no audio. No, sorry. You'll see on the faces here though, they're approaching the pole. Birdie Bowler says, look, up ahead. What's that up ahead? And the men, great heroic music playing, hoping they'll be first there. They see something in the distance. You see the vastness of the material. The shot comes back, so the flag's prominent in the shot. As they see the black flag, they realise they're going to beat into the pole. So we have 2 remaining photos of the British team as they reach the South Pole. All 5 of them standing here. They used a time, a little string, to pull the string, and have a look at the look on their faces there. Poor Bertie Beetles over on the far side. How exhausted he looks. They did their own calculations and they reckon the Norwegians had missed the South Pole by about a mile. So they figured out themselves and they went and figured their own South Pole over there. We've since figured out both wrong by about a kilometres per mile on both, but pretty close considering the size of the place. The second photo they've taken, have a look at Scott's face, back, middle, absolutely exhausted. And if you look very, very closely, Bertie Beetles here has a string in his hand. That's the string they pulled to trigger the camera to take a photograph. Absolutely exhausted. So let me talk you through who they had on their trip. Henry Robertson Bowers, known as Birdie because he's hook-nosed, 29 years old. After his father died in Rangoon, his mother alone raised him from the age of 3 with 2 older sisters. He went to sea as a cadet and reached the rank of junior officer. He was very short at 5'4", red hair to suit his beak-like nose, but was indefatigable. Pardon me, jump ahead one. Very, very hard worker. Known for his toughness and dependability and his cheerfulness. No polar experience, but always willing to give it a go. Next was Edward Adrian Wilson, 39. On the far, where are we standing? Sorry, should be Wilson standing here. Scott's good friend. Described as clever, sensitive, and a boisterous child. Driven to be a naturalist and Christian. Contracted tuberculosis while doing missionary work in parts of England. Qualified as a doctor and was married 3 weeks before going to Antarctica with Scott. His nickname was Uncle Bill. and he was described by Scott as the finest character he ever met. Next, we have the two strongest men in the expedition. Edgar Evans, 35, a Welsh naval seaman, met Scott while in the Navy and accompanied him on his first Antarctic journey on the Discovery. He was described as a huge, bull-necked, beefy figure and a beery womanizer. In fact, he was nearly left behind on the second expedition when he drunkenly fell into the water while boarding the ship in New Zealand. But he pleaded for a second chance. Scott chose him for his size and strength, but on the same diet as everybody else, he suffered most from lack of food. And finally, Lawrence Edward Oates. Born to the land of gentry, known as Titus, he was 32. He was a British Army officer who had been wounded in the Boer War, and his heroism was commended. His left thigh bone had been shattered by a bullet and left that leg 1 inch shorter than the other. He had a very domineering mother. He was accepted for his experience with horses and the fact he paid £1,000 to join the expedition. There was an accusation that he'd fathered a child with an 11-year-old girl and had to leave the country, and he was highly critical of Scott in his journal entries, and his mother never forgave Scott for his death. Tent Norway. What did you leave in the tent at the pole for Scott? Some cake, some brandy, a letter to the King of Norway that he should deliver for them.
A and B.
A and B. No, sorry, it was C. They left a letter for the King of Norway. You'd like to have thought it was A and B. A letter to the King of Norway, Haakon. And Scott was a bit sarcastic about it, that they left him a letter to deliver up a delivery point. So Scott wrote in his journal, "Great God, this is an awful place, and terrible enough for us to have laboured to it without the reward of priority." Translated, bummer, we didn't get here first. 10 United Kingdom. On Scott's return journey, did the weather become A, slightly colder, B, rapidly colder, C, colder than expected?
B, rapidly cold.
B, rapidly colder. Well, they had no, remember they broke their thermometer. But in fact it did. The temperature plummeted, and we know that from later weather records. On the return march it was unusually bad. In particular when they reached the Great Ice Barrier, the temperature was much lower than expected for the season, making the surface much less suitable for the sled runners. Furthermore, the tail wind, which they expected to aid them on the way home and put a sail on the sled and help them, did not appear. So the weather really turned against them. Scott wrote in his journal, "Our wreck is certainly due to the sudden advent of severe weather. The daily minimum from late February until the final camp has been estimated to be between -10 to -20 Fahrenheit, below what would normally be expected that time of year." And from that journey on, in his journal, there's no optimism whatsoever. It's become a slow battle for survival. So when cold gets that low, it actually affects many things. The ice is less slippery for your sleds. Snow needs more fuel to melt. There's greater stress on the body to stay warm. Increased risk of frostbite. And it's slowed down the making and breaking of camp each day. So as temperature gets lower, it's harder going for the men. Pulling's harder, the sled doesn't work harder, they need more food and fuel. Team Norway, question. What was the major difference in the Norwegian and British diets? Was it A, pure wheat versus wholemeal flour? B, peas in the pemmican? C, vitamin B and vitamin C in their diets?
Vitamin B and C in the diet.
Vitamin B and C in their diets. Let's have a look. All of these, in fact, A, B and C. Even though vitamins weren't yet known what they were, they had wholemeal flour and oats, which provide vitamin B. They had peas in their pemmican, which provided vitamin C, and vitamin B and C together. So here's an example of Team UK's food. Scott and his men were supplied with rations of pemmican, which is largely lots and lots and lots of fat mixed in with other things. There was sledging biscuits, sugar, butter, tea, cocoa powder, and together it supplied about 4,000 to 4,500 kilocalories a day. However, they were expending 7,000 kilocalories a day, so they were at a deficit. And that's 7,000 is greater than athletes in training. And for months on end, it would lead to slow starvation. On Team UK, on Scott's return journey, they stopped for a day to collect A, rock samples, B, ice samples, C, penguin droppings.
Rock samples.
Yes, indeed, they did. They came across some very fascinating fossils and spent many hours collecting these fossils, loading them onto the sledge and carrying them. So time and weight added to it. But these fossils in the UK, they can be seen, and you see those small dark black spots in the rock there? They represent vegetation that they want to say this had been subtropical at some time. That was the first indication of subtropics in the Antarctic. Rock samples weighed 14 kilos or 30 pounds to the sledge. So we're making their way south, 17th of February 1912, Petty Officer Evans dies. During the 100-mile descent of the Bearsmore Glacier, Evans suffered a fall, left him, Scott wrote, dull and incapable. He never really recovered and may have fell again on the 17th of February, died near the foot of the glacier, and they found him behind, taking off his clothes, indication it may have been scurvy and hemorrhaging of the brain that he actually died from. 16th of March, Captain Lawrence Oates dies. He was badly frostbitten, couldn't walk well. He had the famous quote in the journal, "I'm just going outside and I may be some time." His journal note showed he was not happy with Scott's leadership. There's a small film clip from 1948, Oates' death. It never rang true to his mother. His mother didn't believe that he would voluntarily step outside into the cold, and she believed Scott had coerced him to step out and sacrifice himself. He was told that Petty Officer Evans likely died from being despondent and depressed, as he had no one from his own station in life to talk to. Chief ever blamed Scott. So here we have the points on the return party. You can see where each they lost their team members as they were travelling. Norwegians, Evans dies at the foot of the Bearsmore Glacier. Oates dies on the return across here, and this is as far as the rest of the team get for their last tent supply, last camp. Scott's party found, strangely, they had less fuel at each depot than they expected. They were blaming the party that gone before them, but we now know that due to natural leakage, that it was evaporating, losing fuel. That meant they were less able to warm up, less able to make hot drinks, and also less able to raise the temperature inside their tent. The final camp, Scott and Wilson, Boas, was 11 miles short of the last depot they were heading towards, 1 ton depot. They were held there in a blizzard. They'd hoped they'd be able to make it. They knew it was only 11 miles to more food and fuel, but a blizzard kept them in the tent. Scott had badly frostbitten feet, and Scott had actually placed 1 ton depot short of where they planned to put it. Had it been put where it originally would have been planned, they would have reached it. So Scott and his 2 surviving companions, the other 2 companions said they would push on, get supplies and come back, but the blizzard turned against them. Scott's last journal entry, he wrote, "We shall stick it out to the end, but we're getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but do not think I can write any more. R. Scott. Last entry, for God's sake, look after our people." The 3 bodies in the tent were not found until 8 months later, the 12th of November 1912, when the expedition sent a party out to look for them. A large cannon of snow was erected over the tent and a makeshift cross erected. Before the Terra Nova left for home, a memorial cross was erected on Observation Hill overlooking Hut Point, and the cross is still there today. So in summary, the British covered 930 miles to the pole, 79 days there, and they lasted 71 days on their return journey. Team Norway travelled 850 miles to the pole, 56 days there, and 43 days back. Team United Kingdom, who did Scott put the blame on? The support team, the ponies, or himself?
The support team.
The support team. Now, it's a trick question. None of those. Scott wrote, no one is to blame, and I hope no attempt will be made to suggest that we had lacked support. Now, here's an open question. In 2006, there was a reenactment done on Greenland, because they wanted to use Huskies, and you couldn't use Huskies in Antarctica at that point. So they went to Greenland, they mapped out a similar distance, they got a Norwegian team, they got a British team, they gave them the same clothing as they could, they gave them the same types of food as they could, and they set them on a challenge to go to the same pole. In fact, they discovered that they couldn't eat the pemmican because our diets are not used to so much fat anymore. It took them several days to stop feeling nauseous and sick on eating the high fat diet. So they tried a reenactment again. The question is, what was the outcome this time? Was it a tie? The British won or the British lost? Open question. Who wants to go? For an extra point.
The Norwegians won.
Sorry?
The Norwegians won.
The Norwegians did win again. In fact, they had to call it off short because the doctor said it was too dangerous for the British living on those rations and trying to do that much man-holding. So they had to call it short. So what happened at the end of this? Team Norway. Amundsen reached Hobart and he sent a coded message to say he had reached the pole. And you can stay in the room he stayed at in the hotel in Hobart today. He found life difficult upon his return. He was wounded by accusations of unsporting conduct. He was a dull writer too. He then flew a dirigible over the North Pole, first person therefore to both poles. He died in 1928 in what was assumed to be an aeroplane crash in the Arctic on a rescue mission to assist Umberto Noboli's crashed dirigible, but his body was never found. There was only grudging acceptance of his victory. Amundsen wrote, defeat is certain for him who has neglected to take the necessary precautions in time. This is called bad luck. What happened to Scott? He became a national hero. The hailing of Scott as the most noble kind of national hero continued almost without question for over half a century. And Scott's story aligned very well with the World War I, was right on the tails. The story of heroic sacrifice aligned really well with what the UK needed for the national image. So Scott was lauded as a hero, all through the war, the period, World War II again. It was only until the 70s, 80s, people started questioning Scott and looking deeply into it. And author Roland Huntford published a book examining the Norwegian and British things and became very, very critical of Scott and his methodology and style. Perhaps overcritical, I suspect. Scott wrote, we took risks. We knew we took them. Things have come out against us and therefore we have no cause for complaint. But bow to the will of Providence, determined to still do our best to the last. So let's call on our judge and see what our result is. Is it Team UK or is it Team Norway? What's the final score? How many points?
Norway.
18 points to Norway. How many points to Team UK? 7 points to Team UK. Don't worry, there's prizes involved here, so... Thank you, everybody. So everybody from Team Norway gets a gold medal. Pass them, untangling, pass them along. And everyone from Team UK gets a compass that doesn't work. And our very wonderful judge is going to get a clippy koala. So if you see our teams around the ship, congratulate them on their effort. We Must remember, it's not the way to